I want to show you how to make this beautiful fondant quilted cake. Now, I only work with marshmallow fondant. I do have a video showing you how I make the fondant, and that will be linked below. I like to work with marshmallow fondant just because I find that it's easier to stretch and doesn't get elephant skin like store-bought fondant does. Now, the trick to this technique is to get your fondant to the correct consistency so it doesn't tear as you're working with it. So this is what it looks like after I popped it in the microwave for about 30 seconds to soften it up. So I need to color it and get it to the right consistency. So I'm going to start by kneading it on the countertop. I have a little bit of Crisco down on the countertop so it doesn't stick. And then a very important part to this process, I need to add Tylose powder. When you add the Tylose powder to your fondant, it's going to help it become stretchy. I add a little bit of this to the fondant when I make it, and then after I soften it and knead it, I'm going to add a little bit more. I need this in my fondant to make it stretchy, so I'm not going to ruin it as I do this process. So I'm doing this like a dark blue, so I have a little bit of royal blue, a little bit of black and purple, and I like to knead that together, and I still need that color to be a little darker, so I'm adding a little bit more blue, purple, and black, and just kneading that together. It gets a little messy, that's why I like to wear gloves when I do this. And it's a little hard to tell, but as I pull it apart, it's a little too soft. The coloring makes the fondant really soft, so I need to add more Tylose powder. That looks like a lot. It's about a teaspoon. So I added about a teaspoon, and I'm going to knead that together. And then, unfortunately, I had some little sugar balls in here, so I like to break small pieces off and try to search through all the fondant and find those little chunks and get rid of them. I did sift my sugar, but for some reason, I just got a little balls in this fondant. And then it was still a little too soft, so I added about another teaspoon of Tylose powder. And the amount of Tylose powder that you're going to add is going to depend on how soft the fondant is. It's a little difficult to give you exact measurements. And now I just want to let this sit for about 20 minutes. I'm just letting it sit out so the Tylose powder can start to work its magic on this fondant. So I sprinkled down a little cornstarch and let it sit. And I do have a video where I go into detail on getting your fondant to the right consistency. That will be linked below. So now I got my cake out of the refrigerator. I have some piping gel. Now that cake is cold and that icing is hard. I'm not going to mess it up when I do this. I'm getting piping gel all along the outside, and then I'm dipping my paintbrush in water and just thinning out that piping gel. Makes it a little easier to get the fondant on. And this sat for 20 minutes. Look how nice and stretchy this is. It's not too soft. It's the perfect consistency to cover my cake. So now I'm sprinkling down some cornstarch, and I want to roll this out. So I'm rolling it out, and then I'm turning it 90 degrees. Was that 90 degrees? And then roll it out a little more until I get it to the correct size so it can cover. This is a 7-inch cake. So just sprinkle a little more cornstarch down just to make sure it's not sticking to the countertop. And you can see how thick I rolled this out. It's about 1/8 of an inch. I'm using my fondant smoother to smooth it out, and then I'm going to lift this up and place it on top of the cake. Now, in that video that I linked before about smoothing fondant, I go into detail on how I cover cakes with fondant, but you can see I'm pulling it out to get rid of the wrinkles and then smoothing it down with my hands, and then using a fondant smoother to press it down at the bottom and then cutting away the excess. And then I like to take a piece of fondant and smooth the fondant with the fondant. I just find it easier to do it that way. And that looks really good. So I'm trying to find the very front of the cake. That's what's going to look most symmetrical from the front. And there's the front. I'm marking a little arrow so I know where the front is. And I have this impression mat. I'm starting in the very front of the cake, and then I'm going off to the left, and then I'm going to go over to the right. So I want the pattern to be even on the very front of the cake. That's why I do it this way. And I will link a similar impression mat in the description for you. So now I'm starting on the right side, and I'm continuing the pattern, making sure I line that up, and then I'm pressing all the way down on all of the lines to make sure the pattern transfers, and I'm stopping in the very back of the cake. I can tell where the back is because I made that arrow pointing front. And then I go to the other side and start on that side and go to the back of the cake. The pattern usually does not match up. That's why you want the pattern to end in the very back. So now I'm taking my Dresden tool, and there's a curve to the Dresden tool. Do not use the point. You want to use the curve. I don't want to poke a hole in here. So I'm trying to deepen these lines, and this fondant started getting a little sticky because it's a little hot and humid where I am right now. So I'm trying to work quickly. So I'm just using that curve. I'm doing one direction, and then I flipped it the other way, and I'm just starting to deepen the lines going in the other direction. And again, you could see in the back where that pattern doesn't mess up, and that's okay. That's the back of the cake. So now I want to get these indents at the intersections of all these diamonds. I tried using a ball tool, and that made too much of a hole, whereas I found that my little knuckle on my pinky finger made the perfect indent. Now my hands are clean when I do this, and this cake started getting a little sticky, so I started dipping my knuckle in the cornstarch on the countertop and then pressing it in there. And now I'm going over it again, and I'm pressing down with the Dresden tool. You saw that curve motion that I did. This fondant is starting to sweat a little bit and it's getting a little sticky, so I can't just run that Dresden tool across the fondant. And I also have a paper towel that I can wipe any fondant that sticks to the Dresden tool. I can wipe it off on there. So it gets a little tricky when it's the summer months. I love the wintertime. The wintertime, the cakes don't do this, but nobody orders cakes in the winter. But anyway, I digress. So can you see how I'm really just trying to get into each individual line and really press it into the cake? I'm trying to get these indents really deep to give it a deep quilted look, and I'm just working in little sections here because my tool was sticking to the fondant. Now I just want to take a dry paintbrush and try to remove as much of this excess cornstarch as I can. And I'm using a wet paper towel to remove any of that nastiness on the cake drum, and I'm making sure that that paper towel does not touch the fondant. Don't touch the fondant with the wet paper towel because it's going to make a mark. And now I need to make the little tufting mark, so I'm using the tip of my Dresden tool, and the tip is pointing out, and I'm doing just up, down, left, and right on all of these intersections. This was pretty time consuming. It took a little while. And I had a little bubble here, so I'm sticking my needle tool in the center part because it's going to be covered, and just pressing it back down onto the cake to get rid of that air that was underneath it. And I just went over all of the lines one more time to really deepen them. And again, your fondant must be the right consistency so it can handle all this pressure without tearing apart. And then once I have all of that done, I have a little bit of piping gel. I'm getting the piping gel in the lid, and I have some 4mm silver dragées. I will link similar ones in the description. And now I'm getting eye level with the cake and using tweezers to individually place these. I know there's a dragée gun that you can use. I just prefer to do it this way. You can get all of these in there any way that you prefer. And here is the completed tier. How pretty is that? This is the final product, and I did film this entire thing. Let me know if you'd like to see that, and I will put that together for you.